May the words of my mouth and the meditations of all our hearts be always acceptable in your sight, O Lord, our strength and our Redeemer. Amen.
Amen.
Would you please be seated? Well, I thought I'd start this morning by touching a little bit on Amos. It can be fairly easy for the Old Testament reading to kind of slip through on a Sunday, because I know personally I focus a lot on the gospel and what Christ has to say to us. And especially what's known as a minor prophet, which is a really bad name for him, like Amos, we could easily let him skip through. So we've had a few readings from Amos in the last few weeks. We've been kind of reading through the book. And some of those readings have seemed really quite negative, right? These are some of the readings that people will throw back at Christianity and say, yes, but doesn't the Bible say this? It's a horrible negative book. Very easy to say that if you don't actually see the context or understand who these prophets are and what they were proclaiming. So do many of you know who Amos was really well? Next door neighbour or anything like that? No? Lovely. So Amos was a man who I think would be either silenced in today's society, or that I don't think many of us would actually like, believe it or not. It doesn't seem nice to say, but I actually think that's true of most of the prophets. To me, when I'm reading the prophets, I think there's some incredible, profound wisdom here. There's messages that they're giving us from God. Yet if it was in today's society, especially in today's Western society, I'm not sure those voices would be heard. I'm sure they would be rejected, as they largely were in their own time. But then that got me thinking, I wonder how many prophetic voices and words we are missing in today's society because they're not coming from the powerful. Because they're not coming from people that have a great platform to share those words. And because we're not really geared to accept what they have to say to us in today's society. Interesting question to ponder, I think. And I wonder if there are some voices out there that we don't give enough time to. So Amos. Amos was a man who lived in Judea, which is the southern kingdom. So we have Israel, that was north. We have Judea, that was become Jerusalem, was the south. And Amos lived in the south. There were two separate kingdoms at the time of Amos. He's actually the first prophet to have a book attributed to him. It's one of the very earliest. So he was around in the, I have to read my own reflection now, 600-700s BCE, a long, long time ago. We have all this language in the book of Amos that gives us actually a really good look into what he did and who he was. So we know that he was a shepherd. He was a herder, right? And we know that he was a dresser of sycamore trees. That was in there too. Anybody know what a sycamore tree is like? Mm-hmm. Kind of the American kind of idea of a sycamore tree. Well, that's not what they're talking about. The sycamores back this time are actually wild figs, right? So like a wild growing fig all over the place. And we know that part of what Amos did with his shepherding was also dressing these sycamore trees. So he was kind of a crop farmer-ish as well, although these were wild. But the interesting thing about that is that these wild figs were the figs that were only eaten by the poor. Because the domesticated fig was bigger, right? It was juicier, it was sort of more opulent, tasted better. But these sycamore figs were wild. They were smaller, didn't taste as good, but the reason he would dress them, or quite literally slash them off the tree, is because it ripened them quicker. So he would have this at least little bit of abundance that he would then provide for the poor. And this is important because we know that Amos's entire message is about the abuse of power and the exploitation of the rich and powerful in the northern kingdom of Israel. It was perpetrated against the poor and the needy of the society of the south and also a little bit of the north. So what he's doing throughout his prophetic work is saying, look, the way you are treating the poor, the way you are living as elites in our society is completely contrary to who we are as God's people. You say that we have a covenant with God, right? But then you say that kind of lets you off the hook somehow. In fact, that covenant with God means that we have more of an ethical responsibility. It means that we have to live more in accordance with justice and righteousness, which meant treating those at the bottom of the barrel as good as we possibly can, lifting them up, not pushing them down. Now the heads of society, the wealthy, the powerful, they were using things like debts that the poorer farmers had, small debts, as an excuse to push farmers off their land and take that land for themselves to create more capital. This is one of his really strong criticisms. Does that sound familiar? I couldn't help but think that. Like, nothing changes. That's exactly what happens today. If somebody can't afford their land anymore, well then there's a big corporation that's very happy to move in and take it off your hands, right? Push you off that land, doesn't matter how long your family's been there, and create capital out of it. That's just good, reasonable, economic thinking, right? Fortunately, we have an entire book written by a prophet against that kind of thinking. Against people who use wealth, who use power to keep other people in their place. The less educated, the less wealthy. This is what Amos was warning about. And he did it in prophetic language. He spoke about a judgment to come. And only a few years after Amos, I think 260, the kingdom gets wiped out and taken into exile. Prophetic? I think it may well be. So Amos was a powerful voice. He was a voice who was not accepted by the elite. They didn't like it. In fact, he had an argument with Azariah, I believe his name was, in Bethel, who was the head of the temple there. They have a massive falling out, a huge argument, because the priest is enjoying all of the good things that come with being a priest in that temple, and Amos is saying, you're a hypocrite, right? Not just the way you're treating others with your wealth, but also, he says very clearly, your pretentious piety. We all know what piety is. The idea of keeping a very disciplined spiritual and religious existence. So praying constantly. These are good things, by the way. I'm not knocking these things. But having a great fervent life of prayer. Keeping a very disciplined ethic, whatever that may be with your religion or spirituality. Some people will go off and be ascetics, so think monks, they're incredibly strong life. Those who look like they're praying fervently for people and who are clean and moral, right? That's piety. The issue being, because we're humans and we have very complex relationships and complex emotions, we can turn something as good as piety into something very evil. We can twist it and use it as a way to judge other people. We can use it as a way of showing off, like the high society did back in their times. Oh, look how wonderful these people are. Look how fantastic they are. Look how much better they are than those down below. And you know what? Probably didn't actually have that much time to pray. Right? They were too busy trying to scratch out a living from the earth. But these people have opulent robes. They're constantly, where have you heard this before? Praying with long, long prayers in the marketplaces, right? Interesting that Jesus says some very similar things. The issue isn't praying. The issue isn't holding yourself to a standard. The issue is what you do with that and how you use that in daily life. So that's happy old Amos. He has very little positive to say. He does near the end, he uses examples of summer fruits. Diana just read that out beautifully. The idea of having full baskets of summer fruits. That's actually a criticism of the elite. They're the only ones that ever had full baskets of summer fruits, right? But he uses this kind of imagery. It's important we know what the symbols mean. Otherwise we miss it and we don't get the message. So thank you, Amos. We'll get back to that in a second, what it means for us at the end. We can't miss Mary and Martha, right? You all familiar with this story? Mm-hmm. You've heard it once or twice throughout the church's career, or whatever you like to call it. We have Jesus walking into a certain village. He comes to the home of his friends, Mary and Martha. You can imagine this scene. I think we all know people who are like Martha. We all know people potentially who are a bit like Mary. Jesus walks in, sits down, takes his place as he should, as a male in those times. And Mary sits at his feet and listens to everything he's saying. Now, we have no idea what he was teaching. We don't know what he was saying this time. We can't even really speculate because we're given nothing. But I think we can probably assume it was quite profound. When Jesus speaks, it usually is. So he's sitting there, Mary's talking. And Martha's away doing all of her rightful duties as a woman in that society, getting everything ready, waiting on them, making sure the food's done, making sure that Jesus is comfortable. Mary, she should be in there doing that with her. She certainly shouldn't be sitting there with the guest of honour, a male, relaxing, lounging. What on earth does Mary think she's doing? Right? Martha's doing the right thing. And in that society especially, she certainly was. That's what people expected. That was their place. That's what they should have been doing at that time. But just as Jesus has a kind of habit of doing, he speaks up and completely surprises us and contradicts the expectations of the time and shocks us by saying, actually, you know what? Martha, you're worrying about so many things. Mary has chosen the better part. You're not going to take that away from her. I've heard a few times people say, and understandably so, that Jesus rebuked Martha and Mary was doing the right thing. Well, Jesus didn't rebuke Martha. There was no rebuke there. It was incredibly loving the way Jesus said that. It was caring. It's in the same kind of vein as all you who are labour and are heavy laden, come to me and I will give you rest. There seemed to be a great deal of understanding of what Jesus was saying. Martha, Martha, you are worried about many things. Mary has chosen the better part. Don't take it away from her. Now, of course, there's a little bit of me interpreting exactly how Jesus said it, because we can't hear his voice. But the way it is written, it seems very much like a kind way of inviting Martha to join, to be a part of this crowd. So I think there's a little bit of a challenge, actually, with these two readings. One is reminding us very much about our responsibilities. especially about the responsibilities of those in power, those who have wealth, compared to those that have none of either. In a society where we hold up the wealthy, we place them on a pinnacle in our minds. Most of us do, I would think. Two of the most important mantras that we see in society is success and wealth. Right? Our entire society is focused on wealth. Who do we vote for? What is the main? This is time and time and time again, where we have different polls taken up. What is the main issue people will vote for a leader on? Economics, finances. Are they good with money?
No.
That's how we vote. It wasn't a question of the current government. That's how we vote in our leaders. The number one thing in our minds, the people who are going to be looking after the people of the country, is how they deal with money. It's economics. What's one of the main stresses on all of our hearts and minds? Well, of course, money, right? We become obsessed with capital. People claim that religious people believe in things that we can't possibly prove. We occasionally believe in things that are beyond belief. Yet in our society we have millions and millions of people that believe in the stock market. That money doesn't exist. If people tried to bring in all the money in the stock market in today, they wouldn't have a third of it in actual existence. It's not real. We simply pretend like it is. We pretend that it exists. And that gives people status. It gives people power. It actually breeds trust between people and completely destroys trust between others. Talk about a myth, just look at the stock market. But we almost worship this stuff. We give so much of our time to it, so much of our energy to it. Now, it's understandable that we want to be responsible because we have responsibilities of people that look to us to look after them, especially if we have families, or we need to find a way to eat. But when that turns into judgment, how many times have you heard people speak negatively of those who are on the dole when you start? I think we'd be lying if we said that doesn't happen. It does frequently. It's used as, this is pulling a big drag on our economy, right? It's the people that are getting handouts that are pulling a drag on our economy. It is unfair to treat our seniors like that. It is not okay to speak of people that way simply because they need help. Take a guess at the largest majority age group of people on New Start. 55 plus. The vast majority. And they're on it for longer periods of time. Guess what the lowest demographic on New Start is? People in their 20s. And they're on it for a lot less time. Why? Because as we get older, starting to understand this, you believe, as we get older, it becomes far more difficult to get employment. That's nobody's fault. That's not fair. And it's completely unacceptable for people to be spoken poorly of simply because they're on benefits. This is some real world stuff that the cries of Amos can teach us, remind us of. Yes, we do have responsibility. We must do our work as Christian people to bring peace, justice, joy, and mercy to others in every area of our lives. But I think if we look closely in society, there's one other thing that's held up as a symbol of a good, disciplined person, as a symbol of someone who's really getting somewhere, and that's busyness. Right? You've got to always look busy. A person has to be busy, working hard, constantly doing something, always looking at it. I pull myself up for this. I'm the worst at at putting priorities in the wrong place at times. There'll be some weeks where prayer's all the way down there, right? Writing a sermon's all the way down there. Speaking to somebody about God or spirituality or theology is all the way down here because we have all this really important stuff going on up here. Right? Making sure the money's going right, making sure the business side of things are being done right, and prayer drops. Is that true just me, or do others a bit like that as well? It's so easy to do. It's such an easy thing to do. But this is where discipline comes into it. The funny thing about discipline with Jesus is that actually pulls us to a place that's far more healthy. The discipline of Jesus is actually the mercy. The discipline of Christ invites us into rest. Invites us to the feet of Jesus, like Mary found herself at the feet of Jesus. That's where we find rest. That's where we find our fulfillment and our joy and our comfort. That's where we can remind ourselves the truth of what Amos was talking. Not false piety. Not having to look busy and important. Nothing like that. But the true worship that comes within allowing ourselves to be touched by the words of Christ. By disciplining ourselves to be the people we know we are. Trying to lift up those in need most. Realising that we are blessed and we are very fortunate in this country. Much more so than many others throughout the world. So again, we're given a joyous lesson by Jesus. We're given a challenge by the prophet. I invite you all to go out and read the book of Amos when you get a chance. It's not big, it really isn't big, it's a little one. Again, he's a minor prophet, but his voice is, funnily enough, prophetic and strong and has a lot to say to us. But read it also in the light of the scriptures that Christ is in, his message, his teaching. Allow our hearts to be moved, allow us to be stirred to action and find ourselves at the feet of Christ. In the name of God, the Creator, Redeemer and Sustainer. Amen. Amen.